This stage is also marked by the return of joy, an authentic, unforced joy that bubbles up from within. It can arrive unexpectedly, during a walk under falling leaves, in the silence after a storm, in the laughter that surprises you after a long grief. This joy is not the opposite of pain, but its companion. It arises not because you have escaped the complexities of life, but because you have accepted them. You have ceased to wage war against what is, and in doing so, you have found peace. You notice that your energy begins to change. You draw people who are also on a path of awakening. Conversations deepen. Small talk becomes intolerable. You are no longer interested in appearances, in gossip, in the hollow currency of surface approval. You crave substance. You crave soul. And in that craving, you begin to build a life that reflects the truth of your inner world. You do not wait for permission. You do not apologize for your light. You know that those who are meant to walk with you will find you, not because you called out, but because you stood still and shined. The best stage of your life is not marked by accolades, but by alignment. It is not when everything outside you falls into place, but when your inner world ceases to be at war with itself. You are finally in conversation with yourself, no longer denying your needs or numbing your emotions. You welcome all that you are, the fierce and the fragile, the sacred and the scarred, and in that welcome, you find an unshakable strength. You no longer seek to dominate or to be dominated. You walk the middle path, the path of the integrated self. You have tasted both despair and delight, and have seen that they are both threads in the great tapestry of your becoming. You begin to see others more clearly, too, not through the lens of judgment, but of understanding. You know now that everyone is carrying invisible wounds, walking through hidden battles, and so you soften, not into weakness, but into wisdom. You forgive, not because others deserve it, but because you deserve peace. You let go, not because it's easy, but because holding on is heavier than it's worth. You open, not because you have not been hurt, but because you now know that vulnerability is not the absence of protection, but the presence of courage. This is the wisdom you carry now, not in books, but in your bones. You have become your own sanctuary. You have stopped waiting to be rescued. You have stopped searching for salvation in places that only offered you mirrors of your wounds. You have turned inward, and in that inward turning, you have discovered the divine, not as something outside of you, but as the innermost essence of who you are. This is the great return, the journey back to the self. And now, you are ready, not for perfection, but for presence, not for control, but for co-creation. You are ready to live, truly live, not in fear of judgment, not in imitation of others, but in the radical, raw truth of your unique path. The best stage of your life is not ahead of you in some distant fantasy. It is here, now, in the sacred unfolding of your own becoming. These signs are not random. They are signals from the psyche, your unconscious, rising into form, asking you to become fully yourself. The best stage of your life does not begin when everything is perfect. It begins when you awaken, and perhaps that time is now. There are moments in life when the veil between the conscious and unconscious grows thin, when the rhythms of your ordinary days are disrupted by a strange, magnetic pull towards something unfamiliar. You begin to sense that your old worldview is unraveling, that what once offered you comfort or certainty no longer carries the same authority over your spirit. This unsettling, yet deeply liberating experience is a sign that the structure of your life, your habits, your beliefs, your inner narratives is undergoing a profound reorganization. It is the crumbling of the old psychic order, the dying of a former identity, and the emergence of something far more alive. You are entering the threshold of transformation. This transformation does not begin with fireworks or clarity. Often, it is first marked by a peculiar kind of restlessness. You wake in the morning with a feeling you can't quite name, a sense that there is something more just beneath the surface of your experience. You go through the motions, yet your heart beats with a quiet dissatisfaction. The places and people that once defined you now feel like echoes of someone you used to be. The laughter feels hollow. The goals you once pursued seem detached from meaning. You are not depressed. You are awakening. The soul, long exiled to the margins of your awareness, is stirring. At first, you may try to silence this inner unease. You may reach for distractions, indulge in habits, seek affirmation from others in the hope that things can return to how they were. But the soul cannot be fooled. It has tasted something true, and it will not allow you to betray it again. Slowly, the familiar structures of your psyche begin to dissolve. Your ego, once proud and confident in its role as commander of your fate, begins to falter. The archetypes within, the sage, the child, the warrior, the lover, begin to reorient themselves around a new center. The self, the totality of your being, is preparing to emerge. In this period of transition, you may feel lost. It is as though you are walking through a dense fog, unable to see where you are going, but knowing with certainty that there is no turning back. This is the sacred chaos, the alchemical stage of Nigredo, where the old self is burned in the crucible of inner fire. It is painful, disorienting, and necessary, for it is only through the dismantling of false identities that the true self can be born. You must face the shadows you have ignored, the unlived lives buried within you, the truths you were too afraid to claim. It is not a punishment, it is a calling. During this stage, the unconscious speaks more loudly. Dreams become vivid, symbolic, sometimes terrifying. You may feel an inexplicable pull towards certain books, philosophies, or art that speaks to your condition in uncanny ways. You may find yourself captivated by ancient wisdom, drawn to meditative silence, or called to the wilderness. These are not mere whims. They are signals. The psyche, in its infinite intelligence, is guiding you toward integration, toward wholeness, toward a life no longer split between who you are and who you pretend to be. And yet, this path is not linear. There will be days of clarity and others of despair. There will be moments when you glimpse the enormity of what is being birthed through you, and others when you question your sanity. But if you have the courage to endure the ambiguity, to allow yourself to be undone and remade, you will emerge from this darkness not as a perfected being, but as a truer one. You will no longer seek validation through conformity, nor fear the disapproval of those who cannot see your inner journey. You will no longer confuse safety with stagnation. You will begin to live from your essence, not from your conditioning. The world may not immediately recognize this transformation. In fact, it often resists it. Those who are still asleep will feel uneasy around your awakening. Your refusal to play old roles will unsettle them. Your authenticity will shine a light on their pretense. And yet, this too is part of your path, for transformation is not merely for the self. It ripples outward, subtly encouraging others to confront their own truth. You become, without effort, a living invitation for others to awaken. In this new stage, you begin to experience life differently. Colors seem brighter. Time feels less linear, more sacred. Synchronicities abound. You encounter people who feel like old friends, as if fate has woven their presence into your life at precisely the right moment. You trust your intuition more than you trust rules. You speak less, but your words carry more power. You need less, but you give more. You become increasingly aligned with a rhythm that does not come from society, but from the depths of your soul. And in that rhythm, you find your purpose, not as a grand mission, but as a quiet, persistent knowing. This purpose is not found in ambition, but in alignment. You realize that to live truly is not to escape pain, but to walk through it with open eyes. It is not to dominate others, but to rule yourself. Not to seek enlightenment as a destination, but to embody it in the everyday acts of kindness, honesty, and courage. You understand that the journey is not about becoming someone new, but about remembering who you have always been beneath the masks. You see that the greatest gift you can offer the world is not your perfection, but your presence. And so, the signs of this transformation are not always grand. Sometimes they are as simple as choosing silence over noise, truth over comfort, intuition over logic. Sometimes they are found in the decision to rest when you are tired, to say no when your heart is not aligned, to weep when grief calls you home. In these small moments, you honor the great work unfolding within you. You become an alchemist of your own life, turning pain into wisdom, confusion into clarity, wounds into portals of compassion. You are not merely improving yourself, you are birthing yourself. And this process cannot be rushed. It cannot be compared. It is a sacred initiation, unique to your path, guided by forces that speak in symbols, dreams, and synchronicities. Trust them. Trust the unraveling. Trust the silence. Trust the darkness, for in it lies the womb of your becoming. The stage you are entering now is not the end of a journey, but the beginning of a deeper one. It is the crossing of a threshold where the inner and outer worlds are no longer split, where your inner knowing becomes your compass, and your authenticity becomes your sanctuary. The world does not need more followers of convention. It needs awakened souls who are brave enough to live from their truth. And you, through your quiet transformation, your sacred solitude, your unwavering devotion to becoming whole, you are answering that call. There comes a time, quietly and without ceremony, when you begin to feel an unfamiliar lightness within. It is not the ecstatic euphoria of fleeting joys or superficial achievements, but something far deeper, far more stable. It arises like a soft dawn after years of psychic night. This subtle shift in the soul's atmosphere signals that something long dormant within you is now awakening. You begin to realize that you are no longer carrying the weight of old wounds in the same way, no longer seeking outside of yourself for answers that only your innermost being can provide. You are standing at the threshold of the best stage of your life, because you are finally learning to live in harmony with your true nature. This stage reveals itself in the simple, profound sense that you no longer need to explain yourself to those who are determined to misunderstand you. For years, perhaps decades, you have fought silently to be seen, to be understood, to be validated. But now, you notice something remarkable. The need for external approval is dissolving. You speak less often to defend yourself. You smile gently at misinterpretation. You know who you are, and that is enough. This is not arrogance. It is the quiet confidence of one who has met their soul and made peace with its contradictions. The reason this stage is so transformative is because it marks the moment when your identity is no longer bound by the illusions of the ego. You are no longer trapped by the masks you once wore to survive in a world that demanded conformity. You have seen behind the curtain. You recognize the voice of the inner critic not as your own, but as the echo of a culture that has long lost its soul. You do not silence this voice with force, but observe it with compassion, allowing it to dissipate like mist under sunlight. You are no longer reacting. You are responding from a place of grounded presence. You begin to make choices that nourish your inner life rather than merely uphold your outer image. This is not a retreat from the world, but a re-engagement with it on new terms, terms that honor your depth, your rhythm, your sacred individuality. You no longer chase things out of desperation. You move from desire, not from lack. You no longer stay in relationships that demand you abandon yourself. You have learned that solitude is not loneliness, but sanctuary when filled with your own presence. This shift does not mean that life becomes free of pain. Quite the opposite. Your heart grows more tender, more open to the beauty and sorrow of existence. But you are no longer crushed by suffering. You hold it like a wise parent holds a crying child, not denying it, not running from it, but being with it fully. You understand now that suffering is not a punishment, but a profound teacher. It has shaped you, carved you into someone capable of deeper compassion and sharper clarity. During this time, it is common to feel isolated, even lost. The world does not yet reflect the change that is occurring within. You may find yourself wandering through days that feel hollow, speaking words that no longer resonate, playing roles that feel increasingly false. But this discomfort is a gift. It is the evidence of your evolution. You are no longer at home in the version of life that once held you, and this is cause not for despair, but for reverence. You are standing at the threshold. To remain in the familiar would be a betrayal of your emerging self, and so the soul, in its quiet wisdom, makes the old life unbearable, not to punish, but to guide. Like the chrysalis that becomes too tight for the caterpillar, the form must break so that the new life can unfold. There is a kind of sacred violence in this process, not unlike the tearing open of the earth before a seed can sprout. But within the discomfort lies the promise of renewal. What you are leaving behind is not your identity, but your limitation. In this stage, it is essential to resist the temptation to run back to what is safe. The psyche, having once tasted freedom, cannot be returned to its former cage without consequence. If you attempt to return, you will feel a growing alienation, an internal fracture that deepens with each compromise. And so, you must stand still within the unknown and allow the new self to take shape, not from outside forces, but from the quiet depths of your own intuition. This is a time for solitude, for reflection, for unlearning. It is in this sacred pause that the new vision is born. What emerges from this collapse is something extraordinary. You begin to sense a new alignment, a subtle but powerful pull toward authenticity. The activities that once drained you are replaced by pursuits that nourish you. The conversations that once felt shallow give way to deeper, more meaningful exchanges. Your external world begins to mirror your internal growth. You stop reaching for validation and start creating from inner truth. And gradually, the discomfort that once felt unbearable becomes a source of strength. It taught you to trust yourself, to listen inward, to endure the death of the false self in service of something greater. This transformation cannot be rushed. It unfolds in its own time, like the seasons. There will be moments of grief for the life you are leaving behind, and moments of fear as you step into the unknown. But if you remain faithful to the process, you will discover that the best stage of your life was not born from achievement or applause, but from the quiet courage to let go of what no longer fits. You are not broken. You are becoming. The collapse of the old is the first sign that something magnificent is trying to enter your life, not as a reward, but as a natural consequence of your evolution. The discomfort is not your enemy. It is your guide. It is the soul's way of saying, this life is too small for who you are becoming. Step forward, not with certainty, but with trust. For the ground beneath you, though unfamiliar, is holy. Of course, here's a 1,000-word expansion of Sign 5 in the style of Carl Jung, with psychological insight and motivational depth, and no closing line. There comes a time when a subtle but undeniable shift begins to unfold within you, one that is not prompted by a sudden event, nor caused by external influence. It begins quietly, like a soft murmur from deep within the soul, a longing for solitude, not to escape, but to rediscover. This is not the kind of solitude born of loneliness or disconnection, but rather the sacred desire to be alone with your own thoughts, to hear your own voice without interference, and to remember something essential that has long been buried beneath the noise of the world. This yearning is one of the clearest signs that you are nearing a transformative stage in your life. The modern world moves with such speed, such incessant demand for performance, appearance, and interaction that few are given the space to simply be. Most are entangled in roles they did not choose, speaking words that are not truly their own, and following paths they did not consciously carve. And so, when the soul begins to awaken, it seeks refuge in solitude, not out of misanthropy, but out of reverence for truth. It turns away from the superficial, not with judgment, but with discernment, understanding that the true encounter with the self can only occur when all distractions have been stripped away. This sacred withdrawal is often misunderstood. Others may interpret your silence as distance, your stillness as stagnation, your disinterest in social gatherings as arrogance or depression. But what they do not see is the inner unfolding, a great work taking place beneath the surface. You are being drawn back into the depths of your being, like a river that returns to its source. In this space, you begin to remember what it means to be whole. Not perfect, not pleasing, but whole. You feel the call to reconnect with your inner nature, your instincts, your forgotten dreams, your childlike wonder. At first, the solitude may feel uncomfortable. You may feel the urge to fill the silence with distractions, to reach for your phone, to call someone, to busy yourself with tasks. But if you can sit with the discomfort, if you can resist the need to escape, you will find that the silence is not empty at all. It is rich with meaning. It is the womb of transformation. The ego, accustomed to validation and applause, may panic in this quiet. But the deeper self, the self that longs to emerge, rejoices, for it knows that only in stillness can the truth be heard. It is in this quiet space that old wounds begin to surface, not to torment you, but to be finally acknowledged, finally healed. You begin to see patterns that have governed your life, inherited beliefs that no longer serve you, traumas that shaped your choices without your awareness. This is not a regression, but a reckoning. You are reclaiming the parts of yourself you abandoned to fit in, to be loved, to be safe. The solitude becomes a sanctuary for integration, where the fragmented self begins to cohere into something more authentic, more rooted, more alive. And from this inner clarity, a new kind of vision begins to emerge. You start to see the world not as it was taught to you, but as it truly is. You begin to question the values you once accepted without thought. You find that certain people, places, and pursuits no longer resonate, not because they are wrong, but because they are no longer aligned with the direction your soul is taking. You are not turning against the world. You are aligning with your own truth. And this alignment requires space. It requires the willingness to step away from the crowd, to risk being misunderstood, to honor the journey that only you can walk. This is the crucible of individuation, the sacred process of becoming who you truly are, beyond persona, beyond conditioning, beyond fear. And while it may look from the outside like isolation, it is in fact the deepest form of communion with yourself, with nature, with the mystery that lives in your breath and bones. You begin to notice synchronicities, symbols, dreams that seem to speak directly to your innermost questions. Life itself begins to respond to your authenticity with gentle signs and confirmations. You are not alone. You are in dialogue with the unconscious, with the archetypal forces that have guided seekers for millennia. As this process deepens, something remarkable begins to occur. The solitude that once felt foreign now feels like home. You are no longer afraid of being alone, for you have discovered that within you resides an infinite landscape, a richness that no external distraction can match. You learn to trust yourself, not just intellectually, but viscerally. You begin to act from inner authority, not from societal expectation. Your voice becomes clearer, your presence more grounded. You're no longer swayed by every opinion or trend, for you have rooted yourself in a deeper reality. And paradoxically, it is from this place of profound solitude that true connection becomes possible. Because you are no longer seeking others to complete you, you are able to meet them as you are. Relationships become less about need and more about resonance. You begin to attract people, opportunities, and experiences that reflect your authentic vibration. You are not hiding from the world. You are preparing to return to it with new eyes, a new heart, and a new strength. This sacred pause, this turn inward, is not a detour. It is the very path of awakening, and it is a sign, unmistakable and holy, that you are approaching the most meaningful stage of your life. Not the stage that looks successful from the outside, but the one that feels true from the inside, where your actions flow from inner knowing, where your days are guided by purpose rather than pressure, where you are no longer a stranger to yourself. So if you find yourself retreating, seeking solitude, turning down invitations that once excited you, do not panic. Do not rush to fix what is not broken. Listen instead. Something ancient and wise is stirring within you. Give it space to speak. Give it the silence it needs to be heard. You're not breaking down. You're breaking open. There is great psychological power in this, because creation is not just about beauty. It is about integration. What you express consciously helps balance what lies beneath. When you give form to your shadows, they lose their threat. When you honor your longings, you reclaim agency. When you name your grief in a song or a sculpture, it no longer controls you. It becomes part of your tapestry, not a wound, but a thread. You may notice that as your creativity increases, your emotional resilience does too. Because you are no longer bottling your experience, you are releasing it, transforming it, making it into something that can live outside you. This is alchemy, not of gold, but of soul, the transformation of the ordinary into the meaningful, the mundane into the magical. And this process does not end. It deepens. With each act of creation, you become more yourself, less fragmented, less performative, more essential. This is why the return of creativity is not just an interest, it is a sign that the soul is ready to lead, that your psyche trusts you enough now to share its most delicate truths. And if you follow these signs, if you honor this energy, you will not just create art, you will create a new life, one where you are no longer defined by roles or rules, but by resonance, where what you do is not dictated by others' expectations, but by your inner necessity. You will begin to notice others who create not for applause, but for connection. These will become your true allies, not because you share goals, but because you share a commitment to authenticity. Your life will slowly reorganize itself around this deeper truth. You may change careers, or cities, or simply how you show up in familiar spaces. But no matter what shifts externally, the real transformation is internal. You are now listening to the voice that had been silenced for too long. And so, in the simple return to creativity, in the decision to make something honest and raw, you reclaim something ancient and eternal. Not perfection, not acclaim, but essence, presence, and in doing so, you take your place not only in the world, but in yourself. There is a moment in the unfolding of one's inner life when the need for external validation begins to dissolve, not with bitterness, but with a soft, almost imperceptible clarity. It is not that you no longer desire to be seen, but rather that you have learned to see yourself with eyes no one else can offer. This quiet detachment from praise and recognition is not rooted in arrogance, but in an awakening, a sacred return to the self as the sole source of affirmation. When you begin to withdraw your energy from the exhausting cycle of approval, something astonishing happens. Your own voice grows louder, and the crowd's voice grows dimmer. To crave constant validation is to remain a child of the collective. It is to submit your worth to the ever-shifting opinions of others, and in doing so, abandon your inner compass. But when this dependency fades, you step into a deeper kind of freedom, a freedom that is not granted by society, but discovered in the solitude of self-realization. This is not the loneliness of rejection. It is the serenity of alignment. You begin to understand that external applause can never fill the space meant for self-respect, that no title, no compliment, no reward can substitute the deep knowing that you are walking the path meant for you. At this point, people around you may notice the shift. You become less reactive, less needy, less performative. You no longer sculpt your identity to fit the tastes of others, and for some, this may be unsettling. They were familiar with the version of you that sought permission, but now, you move from a different center. You are no longer controlled by the currents of approval, but by the tide of your own integrity. Your decisions no longer require consensus. Your values no longer waver for comfort. You have ceased to barter your truth for belonging. This is a sacred sign, a signal that you are approaching the best stage of your life, not because you have conquered the world, but because you have begun to conquer yourself. When you lose interest in validation, it is not because you have become cynical. It is because you have become sovereign. You now measure your days not by how much applause you received, but by how closely you lived in accordance with your deeper self. Your metrics of success evolve. Peace, depth, congruence. These become the new standards. This inner transformation is often accompanied by a shift in energy. You no longer chase situations, people, or roles that require you to prove your worth. You simply walk away, not out of disdain, but out of clarity. You realize that environments which demand you to shrink in order to be loved are not worthy of your presence, and so you gravitate towards spaces that nourish your truth, even if those spaces are quiet, small, or solitary. The absence of applause no longer frightens you. It comforts you, because in the silence, your true voice emerges. The psychological significance of this stage cannot be overstated. To be free from the addiction to approval is to reclaim an enormous amount of psychic energy. This energy was once scattered, trying to please, impress, conform, but now it returns to you, available for creation, for depth, for inner growth. The personality begins to reorganize itself around essence rather than ego. You begin to notice a sense of coherence between your inner world and your outer behavior. You are no longer at war with yourself. And with this shift comes a strange, unexpected grace. You become less judgmental of others because you're no longer seeking in them the validation you denied yourself. You allow others their opinions without letting those opinions define your reality. This is not detachment in the cold, philosophical sense. It is detachment born of healing. You do not need everyone to understand you because you finally understand yourself. And in that understanding, you find the strength to walk alone when necessary, not as a punishment, but as a privilege. This does not mean you become isolated. In fact, you often become more connected, but with different people. You begin to attract those who are drawn to your authenticity rather than your performance. These are the relationships that nourish rather than deplete. They do not require masks or roles. They allow space for evolution, and so your circle may shrink, but it deepens. You stop performing and start living. You stop striving and start being. This is the doorway to the best stage of life, not a destination, but a state of being. You still face challenges. You still feel pain, but you do so without abandoning yourself. You become your own sanctuary, your own witness, your own guide. And from this place of rootedness, you begin to live not reactively, but deliberately, not to be seen, but to see clearly, not to be accepted, but to accept yourself fully. And perhaps most importantly, you become a presence that reminds others that they too can stop chasing applause and start listening inward. You become an example, not by preaching, but by embodying. The way you move through the world becomes a quiet invitation. Come home to yourself. And in doing so, you not only change your own life, you change the very atmosphere of those around you. Because authenticity, once unleashed, becomes contagious. Before one steps fully into the brightest stage of their life, there comes a curious moment of collapse, a point at which the very structures that upheld their former self begin to fall apart. It is not always dramatic or loud. Sometimes it is felt in the subtle, gnawing ache of things once loved becoming strangely empty. The activities that once gave pleasure now seem dull. The friendships that once felt nourishing become strained. The dreams that once burned with urgency now flicker uncertainly in the distance. This is not the death of the self. It is the beginning of its rebirth. And the sign is unmistakable. Your old life begins to feel like a cage. One might ask, why would the soul turn against its own habits and comforts? Why would the heart withdraw its warmth from the places that once lit it up? The answer lies in the mystery of growth. The psyche, in its innate intelligence, often creates discontent as a signal that expansion is near. That which is known must be questioned, and that which has become too familiar must be released, for the soul does not thrive in stagnation. It seeks movement, depth, and transformation. And when the current of life no longer serves that purpose, the soul recoils. It begins to whisper, "You are ready for more." This phase of discomfort is not something to be feared, though it may feel like a falling apart. In truth, it is a falling inward. The collapse of the known invites a new kind of vision, one that is not inherited from others, but carved from within. As the scaffolding of the old life crumbles, space is created for something more authentic to emerge. But this emergence is not instantaneous. It is preceded by uncertainty, by doubt, by a kind of sacred confusion. It is as if the psyche is shedding its skin, and for a time we are raw and exposed, half-formed and vulnerable. There are moments in life that appear quiet on the surface, yet underneath, something vast is shifting. It doesn't announce itself with applause. It doesn't come with certainty. But within you, a stirring begins. A subtle clarity emerges. The weight you carried for years begins to feel lighter, not because it vanished, but because you have changed. You are not broken. You are becoming. When the unconscious starts to align with conscious will, when the shadows begin to whisper instead of scream, you are entering a sacred threshold. This isn't merely a new chapter. This is the beginning of the best stage of your life. But it rarely looks like joy at first glance. It looks like letting go, like silence, like saying no to everything that wants to find you. These signs will not scream. They will whisper. But if you listen, you will hear destiny calling. Let us now explore the 7 signs that signal this inner transformation. Signs that you are about to enter a phase of life far deeper, more powerful, and more real than anything you've known before. There comes a time in one's psychological maturation when the soul begins to release what it once desperately clung to. This is not a conscious rebellion or an intentional detachment. It is a silent unraveling, a sacred inner revolt sparked by the unconscious. That which once brought comfort now feels strangely hollow. The laughter you once feigned in certain social circles now echoes with artificiality. The rituals you upheld to be accepted, conversations, expectations, obligations, begin to lose their grip. And this is not sadness. It is the slow and quiet liberation of the self. To detach from what no longer resonates is not an act of aggression. It is an act of alignment. The psyche, ever hungry for unity and wholeness, begins to strip away the false layers we constructed to survive. These masks served a purpose. At one time they protected us, camouflaged us within a tribe, made us lovable in systems that required conformity. But now, they weigh heavy, and without warning, without fanfare, we begin to shed them. The relationships that once seemed indispensable begin to feel draining. You do not hate these people. You do not blame them. But something within you no longer bends for their approval. Their language of small talk feels foreign. Their expectations, once your compass, now appear irrelevant to your inner world. This is because your essence, long buried beneath performance and adaptation, is stirring awake. The quiet force of individuation has taken root. When you detach from what no longer resonates, a curious thing happens. You feel the void, not a void of emptiness, but of space, spaciousness. You are no longer crammed with the noise of everyone else's thoughts. And in that sacred space, a question emerges. What is truly mine? What desires? What truths? What emotions were silenced to maintain peace? You begin to remember forgotten longings, a melody you loved as a child, a fascination you buried under practicality, a dream you were told was too much. The return to yourself is not grandiose. It is intimate, a reclaiming. Yet this process is not without pain. The ego protests. It wants familiarity, even if it is toxic. It wants identity, even if that identity is borrowed. It wants validation, even if that validation is conditional. But the deeper self is not interested in comfort. It is committed to truth. It will disrupt every facade, tear down every mask, and dismantle every false connection until you are standing naked before your own soul. You will lose people. This is inevitable. Some will be confused. Others will be offended. And some will quietly drift away, unable to understand the new rhythm you now move to. But this is not a sign that something is wrong. This is the cost of authenticity. The closer you move to your truth, the more you become a mirror, one that reflects to others the parts of themselves they have not yet met, and not everyone is ready to see. But you are ready. That is why the detachment has begun. Your unconscious is no longer willing to collude with the persona. It is now demanding congruence. Your internal world and external expression must now align. This is the real meaning of integrity. Not moral perfection, but inner consistency. You may notice that certain habits fall away with no effort. You don't need to force discipline. You simply no longer find pleasure in distraction. What numbed you now annoys you. What pacified you now agitates. Your nervous system, once trained for survival, is now recalibrating for vitality. The nervousness that comes with detachment is not a signal to go back. It is the tremble of new birth. Detachment is not disengagement. It is presence. For the first time, you are not consumed by roles or scripts. You begin to observe rather than react. You listen before you respond. You rest before you collapse. You are becoming self-led. This is the slow revolution of inner authority. No longer tethered to the opinions of others, you begin to taste a deeper freedom, a sovereignty not based on rebellion, but on rootedness. As you let go of what no longer resonates, new frequencies find you. The right people begin to appear, not because you sought them, but because your energy became a lighthouse. These people don't need you to shrink. They do not flinch at your depth. They honor your silence and match your intensity. These connections do not extract, they expand. This shift also affects how you work, how you speak, how you love. You no longer perform. You create. You no longer chase. You invite. You no longer serve from depletion. You serve from overflow. You no longer explain yourself. You simply exist. And in doing so, you give others permission to do the same. There is a quiet power in not participating in what once held you captive. When you no longer react to provocation, when you no longer fear judgment, when you no longer need validation, you become untouchable, not because you're hardened, but because you are whole. So when you feel the pull to detach, do not resist. You are not losing anything real. You are losing illusions. You are not breaking down. You are breaking free, and the life that awaits you on the other side of this surrender is not louder. It is truer. There arrives a moment, often disguised as restlessness or a sudden weariness of the ordinary, when the unconscious signals its yearning for change, not through disruption, but through renewal. It does not cry out in chaos. Rather, it whispers through a subtle shift in your habits, your thoughts, your longings. You begin to find joy in small acts of creation, as if the soul is clearing away the dust of past conditioning to make room for something new, something untainted, something original. It may begin with the urge to write again, to draw without an audience, to sing in solitude. You are not doing it for the world. You are doing it for something deeper, for communion with the self. This creative spark is not about productivity. It is not about validation or even success. It is about expression, about translating the ineffable into shape and sound. The ego has no role in this space. It cannot strategize or perfect. Here, the unconscious emerges with symbols, colors, images, emotions. The work becomes sacred because it is honest. It is not edited for palatability. It simply is. And in this space of creation, you feel something long forgotten, a return to play, to experimentation, to raw, instinctive being. There is no agenda, only aliveness. The psyche understands that healing does not always come through thinking or analysis. Sometimes it comes through the hand moving freely across a canvas, through words forming themselves on a page, before your conscious mind can control them, through movement, through dance, through allowing the body to speak what the intellect cannot articulate. These are the forgotten languages of the soul, and when you begin to speak them again, you awaken the inner child, not the wounded child, but the eternal one, the wise innocent who never stopped believing in mystery. The emergence of new creativity is also a sign that the archetypal self is stepping forward. In myth and dream, this self is often symbolized by fire or light, something that burns away illusion and reveals truth. This energy does not come from the outside world. It rises from the depths, unbidden but undeniable. You may wake with visions. You may dream vividly. You may begin to notice synchronicities, moments where inner and outer realities align with uncanny precision. These are not accidents. They are messages from the unconscious that you are stepping into alignment with your individuation journey. At first, this creative rebirth may be fragile. It requires protection from cynicism and judgment, especially your own. The inner critic, shaped by years of social programming, will try to convince you that what you're creating is meaningless, that your voice is not needed, that you are too late, too unskilled, too scattered. But that critic is not truth. It is fear disguised as reason, and fear has no place in sacred expression. So you must continue, gently, faithfully, even when no one is watching. In this phase, inspiration may come from unexpected sources, a line from a forgotten poem, a scent that stirs memory, a passage in a book that seems written just for you. The world begins to feel alive again, not because it has changed, but because your perception has. You are now looking through the lens of wonder. You are no longer asleep in routine. You are awake to metaphor, to symbol, to story. Everything becomes part of a larger narrative, your narrative, and you are both its author and its unfolding.